Oh, yeah. Today, if you search the internet for nutrition advice, man, you'll find thousands of confident voices telling you what to eat, but very few of them are scientists. Calories don't matter. Calories matter more than anything. Carbs are poison. Carbs are essential. With all the noise, how do we know what real science actually says? Today, we are talking to Dr. Douglas Kalman, who has spent decades researching the answers. Welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you for having me on. It's a pleasure. Decades makes me sound much older than I like to feel.
Well,
Well, we're all decades here.
oh yeah, don't you worry. If you only knew, you would feel a lot younger. So, all right. Let me ask you, from just to start off, from your perspective as someone who has spent quite some time, how about that, researching in sports and nutrition, where do you see some of the biggest gaps between what the science actually says and what the internet is telling people to believe?
Uh, there are, well, the biggest gap really is the educational gap. So unfortunately, you can't govern or regulate misinformation, disinformation versus right information on a platform like the internet, right?
Mhm.
And whether that's on whatever form of social media is hot at that moment, seems to be things that are short, short that fit short attention span kind of things.
Oh, yeah.
Um, and really, like, that is a barrier for education about anything and everything. So I'll give you an example. I'm a professor at Nova Southeastern University, right? I teach I'm a nutrition professor. Most of my courses are either in the neurosciences or in other areas, sport nutrition, and some other areas, pathophysiology. And so, but
Mhm.
the point that I'm trying to get at, outside of those that know how to use PubMed and other sources through the internet that you could get to, if you ask where do you do your research, I've heard a Snapchat and TikTok and YouTube Reels or YouTube.
Right.
So not that you go even to PubMed or you go to AI or you go to the free that your tuition paid for medical library, right?
Yeah.
Or any library that's on campus on your computer. So like I think those are barriers to overcome.
Mm.
Yeah.
So like you
Oh,
could
sorry.
both of you are involved in sports, right? And working with athletes, and I'm sure you get tons of questions that come your way about being either bigger, faster, stronger, leaner, depending upon the age, recover faster, all of this stuff. And some people may say things what they just heard, right? And others you could tell have, done at least some basic reading and understand what a carbohydrate, a protein, a fat is. And that doesn't matter what supplement you're using if you're not getting sufficient nutrient intake, which includes quality calories, quality carbohydrates, proteins, etc. Then your gas tank is still empty.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Well, we exceptionally love when somebody comes in and we can refer to them as Dr. Google because they heard it they did a Google search. they, they, they start telling us what they need to know or what you should know. But anyway,
Well,
it's always
that
fun.
comes from a variety of different psychological areas, right?
Yeah.
Curiosity,
True.
and like for example, I have a friend who medical stuff going on in the family, and I've coached her to stay off the internet
Yeah.
because she'll go down rabbit holes.
Ooh, yeah.
And it's okay. I tell her if you can go down the rabbit hole, bring your questions to me. I'll help you sift through them. And then if something, you can always go to the neurologist or the physician, right? So,
Right.
the point being is like sometimes it's a bad, it's negative, going down these rabbit holes that people do.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Very, very much so. In fact, when we identify someone as having like something as easy as facet syndrome, if you go on Google and you pull up an image, it shows a big needle going into the low back. And we go, no, 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 that's not how it's, no, that's just an image of in the medical perspective. So we have to, just an image can lead someone down the wrong direction.
Oh, this is true. This is
Yeah.
very, very true. That's why image is all important in marketing.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
The
So
colors that are chosen, the font that's chosen, the word that's chosen.
to
Like,
catch your
I'll
eye.
give an example of a very popular allergy medicine that we all
Mhm.
know, Claritin.
Yeah.
Right, that was
Oh,
chosen
yeah.
because it was close to clarity,
Oh,
Ooh.
and
interesting.
so the marketing agency that worked with the original pharmaceutical at the company at the time and deciding names and doing what they do, you know, Claritin, Clarity, and their commercials, direct to consumer TV, would always show, clear skies. Even if there's
Nice.
clouds, you can breathe. You had clarity, like aha, clarity, no more
Well,
sneezes.
thank you for that story because
Jeopardy question.
what I read about Adderall is the chemist that created Adderall named it as Adderall for all, Adderall. And
Uh,
that's how it's gone haywire. And that is probably the next big epidemic in sports is, you know, people taking Adderall for an event. But let me bring it back to something like a calorie. Let's say calories versus hormones and so on. The like from a physiological and metabolic standpoint, like what does the research really say about calories versus food quality, and where do most people misunderstand that relationship between the two?
well, let's talk about food quality to start with,
Yeah.
right? Unf Unfortunately, 6 to 7.5 people out of every 10 are either overweight or obese, right? So that's usually indicative of an overconsumption of calories, or the caloric intake is greater than caloric expenditure over time.
Hmm.
So what is the makeup and why do I mention that? Because the amount of overweight and obesity has skyrocketed in the last 40 years
Yeah.
as compared to 100 years ago, right?
Hmm.
And we know that there's been the Industrial Revolution times a gazillion for the amount of different foods that are on market. So, for example, nutrient density for the foods matter, and we get a lot of empty calories. So, if in the diet, right? And I'll use name brand just for ease of example, not
Hmm.
calling anybody out. If you look at the amount of Gatorade that's consumed in youth sports, where they play a 30-minute, youth being like entry level, they play 30-minute games max, and they get water breaks every 10 minutes.
Hmm.
And they're given so it adds up, right? Those are not carbohydrate calories that are actually really needed to do anything at that time, and rehydration is actually better spent by water at that time. And then, so those, I'm trying to get to a point where we know that when you have diets that are more predominant, higher in mono saccharides, right, simple sugars,
Hmm.
processed foods, right, low in fiber, and concurrently there's maybe more saturated fat in the diet, right, that it increases your risks of mild cognitive impairment and Alzheimer's by significant degrees over the lifetime. So that's just lifestyle, and that's talking about diet composition from one perspective. So nutrient density is something that I really like, and that goes back to work that's really was put forth by Barbara Rolls, ROSS, RO two L's S rather,
Yeah.
and it's looking at the nutrient. When you look at food, right, you could weigh food, right, 100
Hmm.
grams, a little over 3 ounces, let's say. So, how many calories per gram are you getting? How many grams, and what part protein, carb, fat, fiber, vitamins, mineral? And you can kind of see the nutrient content of that kind of food, the quality in one way. And, along with the water content, actually. So, uh, that may or may not answer your questions, but I think that diet styles matter. And for example, if you're working with youth sports or people that think that they're youth, us, that still like to do some type of sport or exercise,
Right.
but might not really have an education or background in nutrition, beyond that maybe they can cook, they know what to They go out and eat, but they don't necessarily know the ins and outs. Having a basic understanding of the different types of carbohydrates, fiber, protein, that not all proteins are equal. Things like this become important.
Hey, Doc, you work at a university, and especially I work at a university as well. And one of the things I've been seeing, a lot of our athletes are coming in and they say, I need more calories, I need more calories. And they're hitting the junk food places, they're hitting the Chick-fil-A's or the whatever, and they're getting all these calories, but then they're saying, I'm always hungry. And they're always tired, or they can't focus, and they're scrolling on their phones more because their focus doesn't maintain, but they just keep consuming calories. Can you talk the difference? You mentioned it earlier. Can you talk the difference between empty calories and functional calories?
Sure. So you can easily get calories having a bag of Funyuns and a Slurpee, right? Just for an example, but the amount of all the different B vitamins, vitamin C, various carotenoids, essential fatty acids, essential amino acids, protein, fiber, etc., is not there. So those empty calories that are actually higher in monounsaccharides, simple sugars, are not going to be something that is useful for an athlete, uh, because they're not providing any of the building blocks or rebuilding blocks of what the body needs, because you are engaging in athletic endeavors. So maybe they're meeting a calorie need, but they're not getting the nutrient quality. So they feel lethargic. They can't concentrate. They're not getting enough of the precursors. So, for example, and let's say that athlete happens to be vegan or vegetarian, then you actually start to worry about protein intake because of the amount of quality of essential amino acids, because these are used for precursors of, serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine, your neurotransmitters, things that we like, and things that are useful from short-term memory, long-term memory, locomotion, right? And things like this, which athletes need to be on point for. All of us need to be on point for. But so the diet quality impacts, the integration of nutrition for physiology and then for outward performance. And so that's where education, whether it's possible to work, if the athletes have their own part of the dining room, whether they're on their meal plan, whether there's a sport nutritionist on staff, to help tailor some things for more one-on-one. When I used to do university nutrition, we would always have team nutrition for everybody. People got books or handouts or uh, things on apps that had all the info for eating at restaurants, cooking at home, food shopping, all this stuff. And we would do some live stuff there too. But, then you had some athletes that did need one-on-one.
Terry, wait a minute.
Yeah,
I
go
wanted
ahead.
to ask him about nutrient-rich foods.
Yeah.
I mean, before you switch.
I wasn't going to switch.
All right, go ahead then.
I was just going to say, I mean, yes, you're right. But a lot of these processed foods, they almost put like fake flavors. And it seems like the athlete gets hooked on, oh, these taste good and real food tastes bad. And then you have the nutrient-rich foods that Spencer is going to talk about. I mean, how do we get these athletes to go, oh, that tastes really good? It's almost like being addicted to candy almost. How do you help these athletes change their taste buds, I guess is a better term.
Well, part of that is maturity and part of that is exposure. So for some athletes and some teams, we'll have interaction with cooking so they could see what fresh cooking, fresh food, fresh tastes like. How to use spices. I personally used to take various teams on first the supermarket tour and then helping them put together how to understand it, with my other team of dietitians that would help for that kind of stuff. So there is education, that's really needed. It's hard to give a quick answer on something like that.
I think it's
There's
the
methods of
parents.
delivering that.
I think the parents need the education more to retrain the
I think
kids.
there's something to be said for, I know years ago, I would think that there's something to be said for home education, nutrition in the household, along with the whole other slew of things. and in the schools, which it doesn't really happen. But when I remember going to school, that we had at least, one course and
Yeah.
that included basic nutrition as like eighth grader or something. Um, so uh, I don't have a quick, easy answer, Dr. Terry.
That's okay.
Well, I'll tell you what, though, there was an opinion article in New York Times several years ago that really struck me. Is obesity a just a food consumption problem? Is it an emotional thing? And what they talked about was exactly where you're leading to about nutrient dense foods. So the example the writer used was, if you took a tomato from 40 or 50 years ago and compared it to a tomato today, the tomato from 50 years ago was smaller, much more dense, and it would satiate the body's appetite or need for certain nutrients. Whereas the tomato today, you'd need two of them to make up the nutrients that were in the tomato from 50 years ago. And I thought, wow, because your body is what's talking. Your need to balance some of the chemistry that you might be lacking. Any thoughts on that? I mean, you can go across the border to Canada, and the eggs taste like eggs there. It's just
I'm
completely different.
wholeheartedly with you in the sense that agricultural practices have been influenced, of course, by business, right? If you own, if you're and you're selling meat, you own cows, you're selling meat, right? You want to be able to get the most pounds out of that cow that you could sell because you're getting paid per pound, or along those lines. And that's why different things are used to increase the marbling of the meat, increase the size of the animal. Even like you said, with fruits and vegetables. I just bought grapes last night in the supermarket that are, I don't know, size of golf balls, if you ask me. All right.
Oh, yeah,
And
yeah.
the cashier and I were laughing about it. I asked, like, whatever you're putting this fruit on, where do we get it? Like,
Right.
um, so what happens with that is you're getting less nutrient dense foods because it's not in proportion. It's not the same. And what you said, where you go outside the U.S.
Yeah.
and food systems are different, you go out to eat or you go to the markets to buy food, eat it. The Even breads, the
Yeah.
tastes are cleaner, more vibrant,
Mhm.
um, which is like the impact here of what we have with these agricultural practices. I do know that there's a movement, may or may not be part of Maha, but to try to increase regenerative farming, to try to to do things that can be more back to nature and also better for agricultural practices. I don't know if that's going to change the size of a tomato.
So if
But
if you were Dr. Kalman, if you were to take someone around the grocery store, and yes, of course, tell them about the perimeter being the more nutrient oriented foods, but like, what would you tell the audience that they can do now to find more nutrient dense foods? Do you go look for farm to table places I mean, what would you suggest that someone could do?
so a few different things. Um, when it comes to fruits, fresh fruits,
Yeah.
right? When it comes to vegetables, fresh vegetables. However, one thing that should not be diminished at all is that frozen vegetables, more often than not, have greater nutrient quality than fresh,
Mm. Really?
because in farming practices,
Yeah.
typically within an hour of it being picked from the field, it's already gone through an initial wash and is starting the flash freezing process, right? Which, if you compare, when you go to any supermarket, the fresh produce that's there came on a truck from somewhere,
Yeah.
right? Now, whether that truck was refrigerated or not, I don't know. But and some things cross state lines and cross countries. So some things could be just a couple of hours. Some things could be, maybe a couple of days if it's Florida oranges going up to the Northeast, because,
Right.
right?
Hmm.
So things like this, also impact choices. So meaning I don't diminish frozen whatsoever, because
Wow.
knowing the practice of that. So
That's great advice.
yeah. Then, of course, fish, poultry,
Yeah.
red meat, those are, choices too. In the supermarket, I also like to give 30,000-foot views of things. If you're looking at grains, look for whole grains, whole wheat, not the white pasta. Try to get the wheat pasta, not the white rice, maybe brown rice. If you really can't stand it, you can always make a mix, 50-50 of the two. Like things like this. Experimenting with beans, that have, one of the things that are no different with athletes in the big picture than society is that almost 70%, if not more, of Americans don't get the recommended amount of fiber, right? And fiber plays a role. You could argue probably maybe the strongest role with the different types of fibers in influencing our microbiome, our gut health. And people that have a healthier microbiome, which often does coincide with athletes, but your microbiome is greatly influenced by your diet, and which then influences your sleep quality, which then influences your immunity, which then influences your recovery. So as an athlete, there's an interrelationship for sleep and microbiome. There's also a diet relationship. We know that athletes or anybody that gets at least 1.5 grams of protein per kilogram has better sleep quality than those people that get less. There's been research published on that, looking at controlling for protein, looking at the impacts on sleep quality, right? So there are things that we try to coach to teach, and also to read food labels. If you're going to be, some things are captain of the obvious to some of us and not to the others because they don't have exposure. So, for example, I love pasta, but then they want to make it with Alfredo sauce, which might not be the best thing if you're going to have a 90-minute soccer game, 5 hours later,
Right on.
for your midday meal, right? So
Yeah.
all of these things come into play.
That kind of leads into the next thought, which is obesity. That's one of the hottest research things on the internet, as we were talking earlier. And there's so many, every camp has the keto camp, the carnivore camp, intermittent fasting, plant-based, and they all say that they're backed by science. If you step back and look at each system, what is some of the advice you give to your students?
Well, this is a great question. And there actually have been a handful of studies that have grouped these popular diets and put them head to head over a 6-month or a 1-year or a 2-year duration period, right? And one of the findings that's ubiquitous is that many of them help you get to the same amount of weight loss. However, the impact on mood states and the impact on cognition is different, as well as nutrient quality. And not picking, because all various diets have nutrient gaps, and that's one reason why supplements were invented, to help fill the nutrient gaps. Now, what we forget in science, in education, and in society is that we supplement the diet from the time of birth, right? Babies born in hospitals are given 2 vitamins within the first 2 days, typically, of life. Vitamin K injection, right? It's an injection, but it's still supplemental, and it's meant for a purpose, and vitamin D. And then they're usually discharged on D drops or some type of liquid D, right? Because there's many different reasons. Then if you think about it, supplement. Okay, foods. Oh, wow. We have fortified foods and we have enriched foods. So fortify, when you're making from the field to bread, the vitamins, minerals, and fiber is stripped out, and we end up getting white bread. And then the vitamins are put back right? And then certain things, if you want it to be at higher levels than what naturally occurs, it's enriched. Fortified, you're adding it to. So in these both instances, if you go look at a cereal box,
Yeah.
that cereal, in that processing to ultimately make that cereal, all those vitamins and minerals were taken out. And then that content that you see on that food label is through enrichment or fortification. So you're supplementing every time you open up, anytime that you open anything that comes from a package, really, right? Milk has extra A and D in it. Water has, fluoride in it.
I think of Wonder Bread. Wonder Bread was always, the commercial was always, fortified with 8 essential vitamins. I'm thinking, well, what happened to the original stuff that was in there?
Well, I mean, on a cereal, again, just easy to pick out. And I think I have this right. Total, they would mark it 100% of 12 vitamins and minerals. Where your total need, total cereal.
Yeah. Right.
So supplements have always been part of the human, in recent times, experience, last 100 years or so. And now we have other varieties of supplementing the diet with nutrients that we've learned about, that can aid in recovery, that can aid in supporting longevity, or for variety. Even medically, we use supplements, right? Supplemental nutrition's used for people with poor appetites. Okay, now we tell them to eat more and give them a can of Ensure. Check, we did it. Doesn't mean they ingested it, but they're around and they have utility.
So when you have, so are you saying when people decide to go on these carnivore diets, these ketos, whatever the camps they are, what they are lacking is that they have to figure out what they're missing out of that?
Yeah, anytime you cut out a whole food group from your diet, how are you not also cutting out all the nutrients that occur in that food group?
Interesting.
So you are. So those become your own personal gaps. Then if you ever go to a registered dietitian or somebody else that can take a look at like a food log to do an analysis of what you say that you're eating, they can also look by analysis what vitamins, minerals, fiber, amino acids, protein, etc., essential fatty acids are lacking in the diet. But we know that, for example, if you go on a keto diet, we already know by 70% fat or higher, right, 10% or less carbs, and then the rest from protein, we already know what nutrients that's going to be low in. It's been well published. So those people that, if they want to do it and that's what they choose to eat, then they should be also educated on what their nutrient gaps are going to be. So, for example, we are seeing in those people that eat a lot more meat, carnivore, and similar, an increase, believe it or not, here in the United States of scurvy, of vitamin C deficiency. And if you think about it, if, not making a joke out of it, but if you're basically eating is meat, you're not getting any vitamin C in your diet. So you're not having citrus, right? To any great degree, a great vitamin C source. So these things are real world. I presented earlier this week on a case of a woman that developed hyperpigmentation of the knuckles, right? Which is an early physical sign of B12 deficiency. And because of B12 does play a role in melanin production. And so luckily that person then had a blood test. Yes, it confirmed that they were B12 deficient. Oh, lo and behold, she's been a vegetarian since childhood.
Yeah.
Right. And then she was treated therapeutically and everything returned back to normal, including her skin pigmentation around her fingers, her knuckles, especially. So education for any of these camps, diets, tribes is still important. I can't think that I can say from a longevity standpoint, right, that the mind diet seems to have the most evidence for cardiovascular health and cognitive health over the lifetime. Right.
Which diet was that?
It's called the MIND, MIND, which has been studied at various universities, but it's easy to think of as a mashup of the Mediterranean diet, along with the dietary alternatives to stop hypertension, popularly known as the DASH diet. So those two diets have been put together and studied by various universities, Northwestern University, Rush Medical Center, and others, on younger people and older people, that if you eat this way, what is the impacts on cardiovascular health and cognitive function in different age groups, and they've all been beneficial. Now, one thing I could tell you as somebody that's definitely not caffeinated at the moment, but one thing that I could tell you is from work in sport nutrition is that sport nutrition on the most serious basis is performance nutrition. And performance nutrition is not always about health. It's about performing for that sport. So a big example would be football players, depending upon your position. If you're a lineman, they like you big. The bigger you are, as long as you can move fast, fine. So a lot of the linemen that are 325, 350, they eat to keep their weight up. They're doing a lot of that physical activity so they can keep their explosiveness, right? The NFL average player has an average of 3 years in the league, so not for long, right? And what happens is they don't always get education about, well, how do you eat when you're not training 4 or 5 hours a day and you have to be this weight? And then they have in that world a significant amount of diabetes and obesity, with the average age of death for an NFL player is 20 years before all of us, right? Is in the mid 50s.
Yeah.
So now about 24, 23 years less than the rest of us, which is, why do I bring that up? Is that sport nutrition is on some levels is about performance, but if you also want to get into educate the athlete, what about when you're not doing this, And we could see it in the real world when you see former athletes that, have changes and they talk about it. Well, I don't train as much, and now I gained all this weight, and all right, now I'm getting back, in shape with medicine or without these days. So I think that's also something on the college level, because not everybody gets to go pro in all of the different sports at universities. So being able to teach some of that is also important.
The epitome of what you're saying is in the world of bodybuilding. The way they prepare to look amazing on stage is probably the most unhealthy moment of their entire life, but they look chiseled out. They do, and they're, not to mention the, whatever anabolic steroids they're on, or any kind of diuretics and things like that. I mean, you're absolutely right.
It's interesting. Part of my sport nutrition career is, I was a performance coach, performance nutritionist on season 21 of The Ultimate Fighter. And that was when we filmed the Black Zillions. It was a team versus America Top Team.
Yeah.
And so there, we're talking, for some people, the way that the TV show was filmed is it was filmed over 24 hours a day for 6 weeks. And then when it goes to TV, they break it up into a 13-week season or something like that, right? Because we would have a certain amount of fights per week and all of this stuff. And, I bring this up because in a conversation with somebody that now no longer competes, no longer fights, is another part of their life, has moved on. I recently was talking to him, and he's easily 50 to 70 pounds heavier than what he used to be.
Yeah.
And I asked him, I said, okay, dad life, what's going on? Right. And he said, no, he said, truthfully, in my mind, I still can't get past going to sleep hungry so many different nights. So, and with the sport of bodybuilding, one of the things that's not talked about about that is that that's an appearance sport. So they want to look at and lean as ripped and whatever category that they're in. and they do these extreme things. And while the other aspects of what they're doing, the exercise and all that stuff, is about health, sometimes the physical appearance stuff is not about health. It's just about looking amazing, right? Then you have athletes that do weight-based sports that sometimes will cut 10% of their body weight in the last 12 hours before weigh-in, and that's wreaks all sorts of havoc. That's not good either. And I remember having another conversation with one of the UFC fighters, actually, and one day he came back. We're at the gym, and he comes up to me and he says, "Hey, guess what I did last night?" And I thought, you're from the UK, you're living in Boca, maybe you went to something, Meisner Parks or something, right? And he said, "No, I went for a 10-mile run." And then so he's like, "What's that look on your face, Doc?" And I said, "Are you training for a marathon or a 3-round fight?" Right? Your sport is 15 minutes long.
Right on.
Right. So, like, sometimes, not that everything that you have to do has to be sport specific, but you have to be aware of what you're doing. Not always more is better.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So for him, it was just getting an understanding. Okay, maybe he needed to do that for his head, because sometimes exercise is cheaper than a therapist.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So that was it. But it never happened again. Then he understood, like, training for a fight versus running because you just feel like opening it up. And
Yeah.
there's a difference.
Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah. Good.
One of the things that I could ask you, if you don't mind, is,
Sure.
do you find a difference in the type of questions you get from patients if that patient is just, let's say, a regular person versus a teenage athlete or an older somebody that is physically active in their 20s, 30s? Or what are some of the questions that you guys get?
Well, we definitely, they ask what to eat before a competition, and it depends on if it's, endurance or strength. Well, or more importantly, is there any kind of eating or food protocol or diet protocols that would help with healing? Any thoughts on that?
Um, if you cut a Mexican yam in half and you put it on the injury and it's iced, that will work really well.
Oh my.
I wasn't expecting that.
I did not expect.
So foods for recovery, instead of saying specific foods, I have to keep you on your feet,
That was a good one.
Instead of saying specific foods, I'd rather say foods that are rich in omega-3 fatty acids, right? Because omega-3 fatty acids have what main function in the body? They act and promote anti-inflammatory. And when you're looking for recovery, typically you're dealing with some type of inflammatory state, either from heavy training, or you train quite frequently, so your stress load is high, right? All these different things. So omega-3 fatty acids. Then I also look for a variety of naturally occurring antioxidants. So colorful vegetables, colorful fruits. The more colorful, typically, the more polyphenols, right? And with the more different type of polyphenols and phenolic acids, they have a variety of antioxidant effects and immune supporting effects. So when you support normalization of oxidation in the body, oxidative stress, right, you help actually tamper the inflammatory response and the immune response. Because when we have high reactive oxygen species or high oxidative stress, the same interleukins that get secreted as in response to that stress, the pro-inflammatory ones, impact immunity and impact inflammation. So omega-3 fatty acids help tamper that, and polyphenols and antioxidants help tamper that a different way, right? So all of that put together, and then, of course, quality protein and the other things that are important. Again, you have to be eating enough calories for what your body's looking to do in recovery and heal. It's different if you're getting ready for a physique show or you're getting ready for a weight-based. Then you want to make sure that the nutrient quality of what you're eating is the highest it can be. And then you also look at what supplements can be ingested that also may help support that kind of recovery. Food first approach, omega-3 fatty acids, a variety of polyphenols from colorful vegetables and fruits. Okay, quality protein. We're talking somewhere in between at least 1.4 and 2 grams per kilo, right? If you're a vegetarian or a vegan, you need 1.5 times the amount of protein as a meat eater to get the same nitrogen value from that protein because of the inefficiency of lysine and methionine that's ubiquitous throughout vegan and vegetarian protein sources. So for vegans and vegetarians, they need to get 1.5 times amount of total protein to kind of equal the amount of nitrogen that omnivores get. And research shows that to be true in terms of the ability to maintain muscle and gain muscle, even while dieting.
Let me ask you, you just reminded me years ago when a patient would come in with an injury that was preparing for any kind of, competition or even a hard practice, I would tell them to be cautious of how much red meat because of the purines that would be pro-inflammatory. Is there still any truth to that, or is that old stuff that I was talking about?
In a way, you have some good what you're saying there. Red meat can be high in certain kind of fatty acids that cause more of a pro-inflammatory response, arachidonic acid usually, right? And a few others. Now, the purines, at one time, people would restrict red meat intake because it's high in purines in people that have gout, because gout is a manifestation of a defect or something disrupted in purine metabolism. These days, medical nutrition therapy is, as long as that gout patient is on like allopurinol or whatever today's treatment is, then they don't have to exclude red meat or other high purine foods, which there are some dark green leafy vegetables that are also high in purines. So, but to give you a kind of a different answer, red meat is just one protein source. There's chicken, there's turkey, there's fish. I've seen other animals also sold in markets here in South Florida. So and there's eggs. There's a variety of protein sources. Red meat intake that's frequent does have a higher correlation with colon cancer and cardiovascular disease. So there is some type of happy medium, maybe once or twice a week, but not every day kind of thing. And then there's so many different protein choices that you can have different proteins at every meal.
You refer to good proteins. Is there something specific behind that versus a bad protein?
Proteins that contain, of course, all of the essential amino acids, right? In proper quantity and quality ratios, right? As meats do and fish does, compared to vegetarian and vegan sources of proteins would be good or better. Now, I may have also meant that red meat is a good protein source, but when I say better alternative, I mean that we also have fish, we also have poultry, we also have all the others. You don't need red meat as the staple of a diet. Just if you enjoy it, have it every now and then, or just a couple of times a week, but not every day saying I'm a bodybuilder, I need the red meat to grow. 300 was a movie. You don't need to eat the brain of your opponent to get as smart,
That is one of my favorite movies, by the way.
It's a great one.
You asked a question, what kind of questions we get from patients, and I've some of the stuff that I've been getting lately is, we'll run blood on somebody and we'll put them on a strategy, and they look at the strategy and they're like, yeah, that looks like too much work. Is there just a pill I can take, or is there just a mix I can do, or a powder I can do? And and I always laugh because I'm like, you take better care of your car than you do your body. But, it's like they always want the fastest strategy to the quickest solution. What's your advice on that?
I think that's an age-old problem. I honestly am not walking away from that, but um, you can't fight logic with emotion, and you can't fight emotion with logic. And so some of those people are reacting emotionally, even though logically they might think about it and say, okay, I need these lifestyle habits, but it'd be much easier to take a Lipitor with my Big Mac, right? Um, um, and so I don't have like a real good answer for that. I think that comes with if we can get better as a society about talking about not preventative medicine, but just good health, public health, good health practices in starting when kids are in elementary school, middle school, high school, somewhat in college, so that as they grow up and have to be responsible for themselves and in homes too, if we can, then we'll have much healthier generations. I don't think we could blame everything on the food supply. When it comes down to it, nobody makes you stop at the local bodega and grab a Twix bar, right? There's nobody saying you must have it. So, and I'm not saying that everything is will, but there is choice.
Right.
So there's a lot to unravel, I think there.
Yeah.
So
I was going to ask him a fun question about, and it's more, from a practice perspective, when people find out that you have this special understanding of nutrition, do they come up to you and go, "Hey, can you put me on a diet?" And what's your response?
that's happened, of course, in my life.
Of course. Oh,
And,
yeah.
just like you guys get asked a million questions by friend and family and somebody that you just met, you know, or a friend of a friend somewhere at a social gathering. And um, for most people, the answer is no. Um,
Yeah.
but if you're actually no, but if you're actually serious and want to accomplish a goal, then we can work together, and this is how I do it. If not, I'm happy to refer you to somebody else if you're serious. A lot of
Yep.
people are in the pre-contemplation stage or small talk stage,
Yeah.
right? Making
Right.
small talk with you because they like you, they want to stay friendly with you, but they're not yet really ready to commit to whatever, you know, to even a first appointment.
Right.
One of the tricks of the trade is that, because I've done it so many times for people where I'll set them up with a diet and it's really planned out. And I'll go over it with them and I'll ask them in a week from then, and they'll go, "Oh, I haven't started yet." So now what I do is I'll tell them to give me a 5-day diet log, what you
Sure.
eat, when you ate it, and you can eyeball the quantity. If they do that,
Right.
then they're usually pretty serious.
Yeah, I mean that's when I say to somebody, if you're serious, this is my checklist. It includes, keeping a log that has similar to what you said, because
Yeah.
that shows at least, all right, yeah, they are showing some seriousness about it. And then
Yeah.
more likely than not, if they're bringing it to you, they're gonna want to try to follow through,
Yeah.
right?
Hey, Doc. Before we get too far into the time, there is something I do want to ask you. I want to get back into something. And you mentioned earlier supplements, and one of the hottest topics right now is the resurgence of creatine. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, creatine as is already part of our diets, right? So we get creatine through food, right? It's most found in red meat, and it's found in some fish, mackerel, salmon, toro. So some of the fattier fish naturally have creatine. And again, anything that's red meat and other proteins. So we get some from the diet. Then creatine is a tripeptide. It's an amino acid made up of 3 amino acids. If you get those amino acids in sufficiency in your diet, and
Mm.
one of them tends to lack in vegans and vegetarians, methionine, our bodies can synthesize the tripeptide that is creatine. Our bodies use creatine as part of the phosphagen energy system, which is basically the energy system that you use when in all-out exercise for the first like 8 to 12 seconds. It's primarily driven by the phosphagen energy system. And then creatine is used, of course, as phosphocreatine for when you break down energy, ATP, all right, you liberate a phosphate, energy is released, liberate another phosphate, so ADP becomes ADP, becomes AMP. So phosphocreatine from creatine will donate that phosphate group to build back up energy too. So creatine has the ability to help influence energy processes in the body and our ability to recharge, right? And so we already know that we store a certain amount of creatine in muscles and different organs throughout the body, your brain, your eyes, your testes, your spleen, your muscles, your heart, right? And that it's used for a variety of different neurologic processes and energy processes, right? So much so that in our brains, in our nervous system, if you will, glial cells, astrocytes, and even oligodendrites, all right, part of a neuron, all use creatine or can synthesize creatine for its use when it needs. Showing creatine plays many different roles. Now, for years, it's been used for athletes to help increase lean body mass, to help increase athletic performance, which it does typically by 5% or so, right? And now we're learning, even though there's 30 years worth of research, other benefits for as you age, helping to reduce sarcopenia, for perimenopausal women to help maintain bone mass, right? To also help maintain muscle mass. Studies even show that when creatine is added on to a standard antidepressant treatment, that you get an increase in the response rate for those people on creatine plus their SSRI versus SSRI alone, because creatine does play a role in neurotransmission. So creatine has become much more fascinating and looked as a life cycle nutrient and a longevity nutrient. And I mentioned life cycle because creatine is used, right, when a woman contracts, right, giving birth, they're contracting what? A muscle. And that muscle is using creatine. And when a woman is going through contractions, right, uterine contractions, that's a lot of creatine that's being used. Creatine's been shown, it has even an effect on birth. And then we also know that in neural development, creatine plays a role in brain development as well. So, and we know that because there are inborn errors of creatine metabolism, if they're not caught early in life, that end up with cognitive and mental retardation, right? So creatine is a fascinating nutrient that's a lot more than, hey, give this to my gym bro, it's white powder, you know. It's really a life cycle nutrient.
Yeah.
If you really want more information on that, if you don't mind, I recommend a website that's called Creatine for Health. And it has a plethora of peer-reviewed, published literature on creatine, interviews, videos, all about these different areas, more than just sports. It's global.
Fantastic for that.
Also, one other thing, I am a co-founder of the International Society of Sports Nutrition. So we are in our 23rd year. We have annual conferences, regional conferences. So for people that are interested in that, they could look up for the ISSN.org or International Society of Sport Nutrition and see our conferences, see our PubMed Index Journal of the International Society of Sport Nutrition. And in our journal, we publish position stands. And those position stands these are evidence-based guides that have been distilled from the literature using standard means, so that a practitioner could then tease out, what can I learn from this? What can I use? We have for a variety, for ultra endurance athletes to a variety of topics, and you'll see that in the journal. Over 20 of them.
That is great information. So you mentioned creatine, and I wanted to ask you, if you were asked what 3 nutrient principles that you would likely believe that would exist in the next 50 years from now, would one of them be creatine, or are there others that you would feel that? would be an important.
So, like, if you're asking if we were coming back 50 years from now, would creatine still be a thing, and be a nutrient of utility? And I would say yes. I would say yes.
Okay.
Both within normal health and within certain medical conditions.
Are there others?
I do think that there are a variety of others. I think that there's always going to be a need for a good quality multivitamin mineral.
Mhm.
I do think that because we do have some important nutrient gaps, I'll mention DHA, especially for any woman of pregnancy age. I'd mention choline, again, especially for any woman of pregnancy age. Um, I'd mention fiber for all of us, but food first approach. It's okay, eat your broccoli, guys. Nobody's gonna. You're better off for it, you know.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, some of those in the sports supplements. uh, Proteins are always going to be a play because that's also about convenience. Most people today and tomorrow are going to be living on somehow an on-the-go lifestyle, right? We don't have 3 square meals at home. Some people are lucky to have 1 meal at home, and sometimes it's from takeout
Yeah.
or it came from a box, right?
Yeah.
So, I would love to see more food prep being done by individuals. It's a healthier
Yeah.
way to live.
Yeah. Terry, you want to go into the
You
rapid
betcha.
fire? All right. All right, Dr. Kalman, we got, well, you answered one of the 5 rapid fire questions.
Okay.
And that was one of them, would creatine still be something that would, be evidence-based
I would
even in
also
the
add
next.
beta-alanine to that.
Oh, very good. Beta
Yeah,
alanine. All right.
yeah.
What food is that found in?
Beta-alanine actually is a dipeptide.
Mhm.
So it's a dipeptide of histidine. And I'm blanking on the other amino acid, but it's found in foods that have proteins. The richest actually would be chicken and chicken soup.
Oh, yes. Good old chicken soup.
There you go.
Jewish penicillin. Got it. All right. So I'm going to jump right into question number 2. And of course, the most brief answer is best, but we get carried away sometimes. So if
Sorry.
you're ready, here we
Yes,
go.
sir.
You've been involved in research and position stands for, well, there's that decades again, but for a long time. How about that? What is one nutrition myth that refuses to die, even though the science has already settled it?
That caffeine is a diuretic. That is a myth that refuses to die. It's been
Oh,
shown
very
in a
good.
multitude of different studies that caffeine is not a diuretic. Caffeine does not inhibit antidiuretic hormone. It does not induce a greater volume of fluid output or urine output over a 24-hour period as compared to non-caffeinated intake. There have been studies done in athletes, non-athletes, healthy young adults, middle-aged adults, and older adults, and caffeine does not induce dehydration. Caffeine does and does not as a diuretic. That's a myth that deserves to be shot.
That is great. I
That was
did not
golden.
expect that. All right. Next question. You've worked Olympic Games, professional athletes, and major research labs. Well, when Dr. Kalman walks into his own kitchen, what's the one food, man, that you'll never give up?
Oh, ice cream.
He didn't even hesitate.
No, I may have changed the kind of ice cream that I eat,
Yeah.
but I've been eating ice cream since childhood, and it's never lied to me. So
Never
I
lied.
continue to eat it.
That's great because that was part of my next question. That was part of my next question. It's, let's settle it scientifically. Like, is ice cream a recovery food or a cheat food?
It could be either.
Of course you say that.
I tend to have my ice cream mix in a scoop of creatine and mix in usually about 10 grams of whey protein. And that's how I eat it. Now, that's a lot different than I ate it at 15 years old, right? But that's how I eat it. So
That's hilarious.
I get the best of both. That's the way I look at it.
That is a beautiful answer, man.
I
When
mix
we were
creatine with my ice cream.
That
That's
is-
great.
I think I might try that
I
myself.
can tell you a story that back in my dating life, going years ago when I was living in New York City, somebody was over and they went to my freezer and they went to go take out some ice cream. They wanted something to eat and they're like, "Your ice cream has freezer burn." I'm like, no, that's just a little bit of whey protein left on top of the ice cream there. It's not freezer burn.
That's awesome. That is.
She did.
that
She
is-
did come back for another date.
Right. It was for the ice cream.
It was. She's like, "You're on to something. Can you make it in frozen yogurt style?" This is
Yeah.
back in the 90s, a long time back.
That's great.
That's outstanding. That's given me new meaning to Bluebell cookies and cream. I love that. All right. All right. Last question. Oh my gosh. I don't even think I want to ask them anything else. All right. You've helped shape the science behind how athletes fuel their bodies and how clinicians guide their patients. But beyond the research papers and the conferences, what part of this work has meant the most to you personally?
The answer to that really is when work with individuals that have had a variety of issues and see them resolve, or have that person come up and share their enthusiasm and appreciation for whatever I may have helped them with, that, one of the things that I take very serious is that, nutrition can impact quality of life. So when you improve somebody's quality of life, that's meaningful. It's very hard. Oh, follow this diet. It's going to help lower your cholesterol. People, if they don't have an experiential experience with something, it's harder for them to grasp, okay, this is what I need to do. But in answering your question, I'm going to give you two answers. One, from having various patients or clients in my life thank me for things I've helped them with. Two, watching students that I've mentored either for their bachelor's, master's, or doctorate go on to achieve great things and accomplish their own overcoming of obstacles and, seeing them grow. That gives great satisfaction.
Oh, that's great. Well, you're truly a mentor and an inspiration to those students you've taken care of. And one of them is a patient of mine who, Norma, referred me to you because of how bright and talented you are.
I'm
and
grateful
you get
to
the
her.
point across.
She knows
Yeah,
that.
very good. Thank you so much for being on the show today. We totally appreciate that.